Karl Amman, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you're a very different interviewee for this podcast, an investigative documentary maker who's working in exposing wild animal trafficking rather than being a psychologist or a counsellor or a coach, which many of our interviewees are. But I wanted to talk to you because I think you demonstrate a certain kind of psychological resilience that I think is perhaps quite rare and must also be quite challenging. And also to talk to you about the price of witnessing the things that you witness. So first, could you tell us your story? Because you didn't start off as an environmentalist. I believe that you studied economics initially.
Yeah, at the very beginning, it was economics in Switzerland, and then I moved to Cornell in the US, where I went into hotel management, graduated, came out to Africa to work for Intercontinental, and then living in Africa, obviously was exposed to wildlife issues, tourism, and slowly got into it, and then got full-time into it a little bit later in my life.
So you weren't originally a photographer, or had you always had an interest in photography?
Not really, no. I mean, as I said, I had an interest after first visiting Africa and Kenya to really experience the wilderness, which was still there and could be enjoyed. I mean, like a lot of people my age, or in our part of Europe, we had seen Serengeti Shall Not Die, which was a famous film at the time, done by Chimek, exposing what life on an African savanna plain looks like. And I'd seen that, and I always had a hankering for experiencing something similar. So my wife and I did 2 years in the Masai Mara as a honeymoon, essentially, camping out, but having an official accreditation to do so, to do also some research work. But during that time, there were a lot of, everybody else living there, every expat was into photography, be balloon pilots or lodge camp managers. And so everybody talked about f-stops and cameras and lenses and so on. So that's how we got into it.
Before I sort of go on specifically into that, I saw on your CV that you were also involved in organising the famous boxing bout between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman, the Rumble in the Jungle. How did that come about? That just struck me because allegedly my mother met Muhammad Ali on an aeroplane once, and and I watched the wonderful film that was made about that bout. It's just incredible, and I'm sure that people would be interested.
Yeah, but as I said, it's almost a book or a 90 minutes documentary I could, make out of the material and the memories I have out of that time. But I worked with Intercontinental, and Intercontinental Hotels for the Africa division based in Nairobi. They were asked to help organize this fight. And they said, bloody hell, this is too risky. This is Mobutu Sese Seko. This is typical African kind of potential shamble scenario. We can't get directly involved, but we loaned the government a few of our experts to help them out. So I was assigned to the Congo government to help out organizing it. So I ended up essentially running the training camp out at Insele, where the training took place. And I got to know those guys quite well, and then the fight got postponed because Foreman got cut over the eye, so that then meant a several-week postponement. So that was pretty stressful for them because they hadn't planned on hanging around that long. They wanted to leave, but Mobutu wouldn't let them leave. He had already paid them millions of dollars. So anyway, I got to know them even better during that time, and I was sitting on ringside when the fight happened, and had a first-hand experience, and I'm surprised people still talk about it today, and I have somewhere in my place in Seychelles, I have a poster hanging up with pictures of myself and Ali and so on, and a German visitor looked at it the other day and said, "Oh, you were there." I said, "Yeah." And then he went on and he knew every round, every fight, everything. And I said, "Bloody hell, you know more about, what happened than I do, and I was there, But anyway, so it's interesting that it's still talked about and still, an issue and still something people remember,
What a life! What a life you've lived. But anyway, it's the animals that we're really focusing on, of course. And tell me about your work now, and how long you've been doing the investigative documentary making.
Okay, I did the photography to start off with, resulting in quite a few coffee table type of books. Started seeing things again in the Congo, which shocked me and I found kind of depressing. Decided, look, is this just confined to the Congo? In this case, we were going up the Congo River on one of these big, huge barges with thousands of people on board and lots of wildlife carcasses. Decided to investigate that component, finding out that it was widespread throughout Central Africa, this bushmeat trade. Decided to document that, got very little attention to start off with, had my credibility questioned, but then the New York Times magazine picked it up, and then from then on everybody bought in on it and accepted that it probably was an issue. And so we then turned it into a book, in a coffee table type of book, just to hand out to members of parliament and so on in the various countries, to educate, to create awareness. And that's how it all started. And from there, people asked me to accompany them on film shoot to show them what was going on the ground. So I traveled mostly with German TV teams, but also with US teams, with CNN and so on. But then later on, not that, about 10 years ago, I decided, okay, I wanted to go more in depth than these half-hour pieces, which can be produced in a week in the field. And I started spending serious time on doing documentary. And I believe you saw the one on the tiger mafia, which went out on Amazon. And now we're just about to complete one on the live elephant trade.
So you're in the Tiger Mafia documentary, there is so much investigative work that goes in, sort of tracing all these different routes where tigers poached from the wild or tigers bred in captivity, and then the market for the animal parts. It must be sort of so demanding and so time consuming to do that work.
Yeah, except, it was an interesting part of the world, and it was adventurous kind of traveling. It was new to me. I'd seen a lot of the world, but those areas along the Vietnam-Laos border were news to me. Also, some of these special economic zones run by the Chinese. What I found in China was relatively new to me. And then basically each trip brought new discoveries. So, as far as the trade was concerned, the motivation behind the demand, who were the people wanting this stuff, for what reasons, and so on. Every time I felt I learned more. And so in these terms, it was very challenging and therefore interesting. So yes, it was about 6, 7, 8 years. But I don't regret having done it, and I learned a lot in the process.
So in all of the work, whether it's with the bushmeat or the tigers or the elephants, you're essentially witnessing or investigating and seeing aspects of what I would describe as real cruelty, as well as illegal acts. That must be very, very hard and you have to film it.
Okay, one does go into a journalistic mode when one walks into those kind of scenario. Most of the time you realize this is a one-time opportunity when you really see something on the spot which you need to film then, because it will only happen this one time, or this person will only talk to you this one time, because he or she will realize what you're really after, and therefore it's not in their interest to keep talking to you. So you tend to have one opportunity, so you have to do things fast and on the spot, and that tends to get you into this journalistic mode where you try to get as much out of it. So you don't think much beyond that. Of course, when you then lie in bed in the evening, say, bloody hell, what I did film today was pretty horrifying, and something has to be done about it, but that comes generally later on, but not when you're in the scene. You kind of, the adrenaline is there, and you have to get this footage right now and right here, and so it doesn't give you much time to think about what you're actually seeing.
Just for the people who will be listening to this or watching this who haven't seen the documentaries or don't know much about these, the trade in either bushmeat or in the case of tigers for parts, could you just give an idea of what is going on in these areas?
I mean, obviously, bushmeat is an issue which we can reasonably understand, meaning people have always hunted and lived off wild animal protein, certainly in Africa. What has changed in the last 30, 40 years, which I have illustrated or tried to illustrate, is mostly how it has been commercialized. Before it was subsistence hunting by hunters living in the forest. And nowadays, pretty much all these forests have been opened up with logging roads by a lot of European logging companies to start off with. Now, many have been sold to Chinese and to Asian outfits. But anyway, once the forests are opened up, once the lorries start rolling, the subsistence hunter can certainly sell stuff into the market by selling it to the driver, who hides it on his truck and transports it to the next urban center and makes additional money, which flows, of course, back to the hunter. So they no longer just hunt for what they need, they now hunt for the market. And in that context, it got totally out of control in some of the areas like Cameroon, where logging was intensive, or even Congo. And so that's what I tried to document, how it had changed. And basically, that's one of the realities which I guess is generally accepted now, is an issue. Tigers, yes, I mean, again, I had heard about, it was an accidental getting into the tiger documentary by being offered 2 tiger cubs, or being told that 2 tiger cubs were for sale, trying to follow up on that and getting much deeper into it all, who might have bought them, and the tiger farms who were trying to do this commercially. And then getting into real details as far as, for example, seeing jewelry, tiger bone jewelry, which was advertised as being the top end of the market product, which was pinkish in color. Then trying to figure out how is it different from the whitish, yellowish, white color jewelry items, necklaces, bangles, and so on, being told by a dealer on camera, yes, because the tiger is deboned while it's still alive. I mean, it's sedated and then it's deboned, so the blood is still in circulation. I don't know if that's actually true scientifically or not, but it's certainly a good story, and buyers would pay extra money for the pink bones over the normal bones on the basis that the tiger had been deboned while it was still alive. So there was more power to it somehow. So anyway, looking into all this, as I said, it was challenging, interesting, sometimes shocking, disturbing, but I felt I wanted to get the story out there, and individual viewers like yourself being able to form their own opinion where they stood in all this.
And you personally, I mean, I think you live with some non-human animals as essentially family members, I suppose. So I imagine that your compassion when you lie in bed at night afterwards for the creatures that you film must be intense. And could you give us a sense of your sort of relationships, your feelings for non-human animals? Because it's not as if you're someone who's sort of like filming it without a kind of an intense personal involvement on your own part.
Is that in many scenarios, you film and so on, and there's no, I mean, even when it comes to mahout and people riding on elephant, it's wrong, but you cannot actually see the actual suffering there. The elephant seems to be reasonably okay. He gets fed, he gets medical treatment, veterinary treatment if necessary. and he has to trudge around with tourists for 2-3 hours a day. So I document that as an abuse, in a sense, of these animals shouldn't be living under these conditions for the rest of their life. But if you have scenarios like Burma, which had 5,000 logging elephants, and then the logging had to stop because there were no longer any trees. So what happens to these 5,000 elephants? They used to earn their keep. Now they can't earn their keep anymore. So if there's no tourism or so, then what's their future? Probably none. So you had to look sometimes at both sides. But then every now and then, you see scenarios where there's clear suffering and clear cruelty involved. And that then, gets me to a point where I do feel I almost want to physically intervene, which you generally can't do in those settings. But it gets pretty disturbing. I mean, in this latest film, we're going to use footage which I didn't shoot myself, but commissioned, of a mother being separated from her calf for the training side of it. The training is pretty rough to break in a young elephant, and to separate a mother and the calf is extremely distressing. Till I saw this footage, I didn't realize how distressing that actually was, and that's, that blows your mind on what goes on that level. I mean, the mother's, pulling on her chains, lying on the ground, and the calf screaming, and it just mayhem. And these guys are hammering away at the calf with hooks, and the elephant is bleeding and so on. When you see all that, but that's necessary to get them to the point where they perform in tourist settings. So pretty much every elephant which you see in those settings has gone through that at some stage in his life, at a relatively early stage in the life, when they're about 3-4 years old. So yeah, there can be distressing components to it all.
When I was studying English literature at university, I became very interested in the sort of impact of witnessing something. And it seems it was something that a lot of Renaissance playwrights, and maybe even Greek tragedians were interested in, were exploring. I remember in one play by John Ford, there's a character who knows about something bad, and it's as if she's kind of punished just for the knowledge that she has. And of course, there's the scene in King Lear where Gloucester has his eyes put out. And you feel when you're witnessing that thing, there's something sort of like very visceral about witnessing, and it's almost as if you kind of want to be blinded in those moments. It's as though we fear we risk being contaminated by seeing evil, in a sense, and so a lot of us, we avoid it. I mean, I know an awful lot of people, and I've not wanted to watch a lot of things because I couldn't bear to watch it, or I didn't want those ideas going around in my head. How do you withstand that very human desire not to be contaminated by seeing what you see?
I mean, there's one aspect is curiosity to find out why is it happening, what motivates the person behind it. And there's one example which I keep always talking about. It was in a small town in Vietnam, and there was all this screaming from a pig, which I knew was a pig, walked around the corner of the building, and there they were slaughtering the pig. Now, obviously, we all know that pigs go, I mean, when they scream and are being killed, you can imagine there's a lot of screaming and stuff going on. So that was obvious. But what shook me more than that was there were children playing soccer right next to it. And this seemed to be the father who was killing this pig for an upcoming festival. And I said to myself, hey, I grew up in Switzerland. If I had heard this, or if I'd seen it, I would have gone up and said, Dad, what the hell are you doing? What's going on here? Is this necessary? I mean, I would have asked that at a very early age, I'm convinced. And I could see these Vietnamese kids couldn't give a damn about what was happening, showed no interest at all. And I started wondering, are we different in some ways? I can't believe that they didn't live in a slaughterhouse, so they didn't experience this daily. This was for a festival which was upcoming, so it was very irregular that they would witness this. And still there was hardly a reaction to what was going on in front of them. So yeah, and the other aspect is that I keep saying, look, this disturbs me. If I document it, if I show it to other people, I hope it disturbs them. If I can take the excuse away from policymakers, from decision makers, that I didn't know, because now they know. They can't say I didn't know, because that goes, on a lot of times. I remember your prime minister. He saw Rishi Sunak. He talked in Parliament about this was before he became prime minister, about having seen a film on tiger farming somewhere, and that the UK Parliament should do something about stopping it. This was totally out of the blue, it seemed. But I then wrote him and I said, yes, there's a hell of a lot of this going on, and we had some communication on this. So, the feeling is, if the British Prime Minister knows about it, discusses it in Parliament, it creates a hell of a lot of awareness about people who potentially have the way to influence policy making down the line.
Yes, so that is the sort of important element of getting the sort of knowledge out there. And I read one article that I found on your website, which was the contrast between the world in order and the world in disorder, that a lot of photographers are taking, there's beautiful pictures of sunset in the Serengeti and the, silhouettes of the giraffes walking past or something. And the idea is that this induces us to love the natural world and thereby care for it. And it seems as if you feel that doesn't go far enough, that you have to show the bad things that are happening to induce the action to stop it. So that it's an interesting, almost alternative view of human psychology. Is it the love that will power us to make changes, or is it anger and distress that will power us to make changes? And it seems that you've opted for the latter.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of the world in order type of imagery out there already. I mean, the point is that that's what's sellable. I mean, I started off that way as a photographer. All my original books were on, beautiful nature, maybe sometimes predator doing their natural thing, but it was nothing cruel or very upsetting. But I then soon realized that's not the reality. That's actually becoming a minor part of the reality. And then you combine that with all the, your Attenborough films and so on, which were all based on showing world in order films. I mean, they were entertaining, not so much educating. And I mean, nowadays he seems to have changed to some extent, and is bringing out some of what's wrong with this world. But the point is, it was much easier, and still is much easier, to sell world in order type of tales and imagery. People don't want to be distressed. If you're a commissioning editor, are you going to buy something like the Tiger Mafia, where you have a chance that people will turn off 1/3 through because they say, I don't need this, I had enough problems today, I don't want to know about more of these issues, it's enough? And do you want to lose viewership if you're a commissioning editor? Or do you want to show perfect world where everything is happy, where the tigers do their thing in their forests in India and so on? And, it's much easier to sell that stuff. So the media is playing a big role in this. So trying to sell what I'm documenting is much harder than selling happy ending stories and, world in order stories.
But do you think that I mean, I know that the most important thing is changing the minds of the people who have power, but I suppose the people who have power can be influenced by the sort of reactions of the public, the reactions of voters, polls, and so forth. But do you feel that there is that within the sort of psychology of the sort of culture we have, that our aversion to dealing with distressing things and our preference for the sort of pretty, the shiny, the saccharine makes it a lot harder to institute the kind of the ignition for change?
I think it does. I mean, if, quite often people are given a choice, they're going to some web page of an NGO, and NGOs are very good at selling their success stories. So if you see something which you find distressing or which you are worried about, then you go somewhere on the internet, decide what can I do about it, and there will be somebody out there telling you, send me $20 and I'll try to find a solution. I mean, I have tackled some of these issues specifically where NGOs offered solutions by going then in the field and documenting that what they were offering wasn't really a solution, that much more was going to be needed before anything was going to be turned into a real solution. So yeah, there's this escapism, which is very easy nowadays, because as I said, you will always find the alternate viewpoint or the party which tells you what you want to hear. There's something on the web which tells you exactly what you feel you should want to hear at this stage, that it wasn't that serious and so on. I mean, I'm from Switzerland. I'm always delighted when I know that we have this rule of, or this system of, being able to have referendums based on 100,000 signatures, which is great stuff because, but it goes then sometimes even too far. I mean, the other day there was a referendum on could cows be dehorned. I hadn't even known that in Switzerland, dehorning cows was an issue. And why were cows being dehorned? So looking into it, yes, they were injuring each other, sometimes in their meadows. I mean, they were fighting, the bulls had these instincts and so on. So by cutting them, there was less injury. And so the Swiss had to vote as a country. Do we want to stop the dehorning, or do we want to stop the dehorning of cows in our meadows? And it sailed through. So yes, there's a lot of people who have not thought about certain things till they're confronted with it, and then they think about it. And I had to think about it. Would I vote pro or con, or what's this all about? So I had to go out and learn, and that's basically what I'm trying to achieve, maybe on a bigger level than just Switzerland, but that people think about some of these issues which they weren't aware about.
When I was watching the film Tiger Mafia, you were trying to talk to delegates as a CITES conference, and CITES being the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. You were trying to talk to the delegates, and I think you got pushed out, thrown out of the conference, and there's a shot of you standing outside, and the expression on your face was the thing that, as much as anything, I mean, I wanted to find out about your life and the work that you do, but for this podcast, it was that expression that made me want to interview you, because there was a look of just, I don't know, complete dejection in a way. And I don't know at what stage in the filming or the process that was, but you've carried on. You've carried on despite it must feel so hard, so pointless, so challenging. And you talk about curiosity and the journalistic instinct that leads you to continue, but it must be a psychological struggle to keep going in the face of not being heard, in the face of danger, in the face of all that you see.
I mean, in that case, or in the context of CITES, which I've been dealing with a lot, and crops up in every documentary I'm doing, because in each documentary, CITES is meant or should be playing a role which it doesn't. So yes, when I see these things and I get to the point and I'm kicked out of a conference because I'm asking these questions, then the next step is logically, for me anyway, saying, hey, let's face it, these realities exist. If you don't want to take it from me here on this platform, let me bring it to an even bigger platform. I mean, I've gone as far as, contact the Swiss Attorney General's office to see if CITES official could be prosecuted in Switzerland for covering up criminal and corrupt acts. which I had the evidence of. So, I feel challenged by being pushed away and being told what you have to say we don't believe is not true, or is not important, or doesn't fit our agenda, or whatever. And then I feel, okay, let me see how the rest of the world feels, or how other parties feel. And then I go and push even harder.
I mean, you talk about it as if it's sort of like I mean, it clearly is a natural thing for you to do, but, I'm kind of put off by a bump in the road and think, oh, well, obviously I can't do that. What is it about you that enables this?
Look, I don't know what it is. I mean, as I said, it's Gerechtigkeitssinn is a German word for it, believing in law. I mean, that law, growing up in Switzerland, going into a Catholic boarding school must have left something behind it. I just feel, rules are there to be adhered to. And the moment I see injustice, law breaking, illegalities, I feel, I have an obligation to see what can I try to do to rectify it. At the moment, I'm involved in something totally different, in having an arbitration against some of the richest people in the world about environmental destruction. My chance of winning is very minimal because they have billions at their disposition, which I don't. And but these cases are in court now. I mean, the arbitration is done. I'm in court with them now. And I feel, their behavior of might is right, or my way or the highway, I'm not accepting. And that's basically probably my background growing up the way I did in Switzerland.
I do think it's remarkable, and you're kind of like that Lone Ranger, the man with the white hat who just can't let the injustice spread. But it's also notable that these are injustices against the environment and against animals. Why? I mean, because there are so many injustices, law-breaking activities in the world. You could have chosen or been attracted to, any number of causes. But these ones, it's not just about breaking law. It's about something that matters to you, isn't it?
No, definitely. I mean, as I said, animals are close to me because we live with them. The dogs run around here. As I said, I spend every day a few hours with our 2 orphan chimps, which are part of the family back here. And, so I feel, I know about the emotions of animals. I love to spend time with elephants and watch them and interpret their behavior and so on. Of course, there's a lot of human issues here as well, and I quite often intervene in the human component, especially here in Kenya. You constantly get confronted by human suffering as well. So why is animal suffering? Why should animal suffering be more important? My answer would be, look, I mean, there's probably in our little town, there's probably half a dozen or a dozen NGOs dealing with human suffering issues or human issues. And there's a few which deal with animal conservation issue, and then even much less with animal welfare issue. And that's where I feel most strongly, because, as I said, I have this daily contact over hours with wildlife, with animals. I look out here the window, not now, but most days I can see elephants down there and buffaloes and so on. So I appreciate what I have, and I feel strongly about it, and I feel human suffering and human problems are dealt with by hundreds of NGOs. There is a lot of awareness of what the problems are. On the animal welfare front, there's very much less out there, and that's what I feel I understand better and can document better and try to create more awareness for. That's about it,
In the article that I mentioned, the World in Order, World in Disorder one, I think Steve Werner was the writer, and he wrote, making a regular practice of environmental tragedy can be depressing. Maybe I'm wrong, but I've sensed it wearing on Karl. He's made a lion-sized commitment and a big difference for one man, but it's also made a difference in him. In recent years, he's repeated to me that it's time to take a break and get back to the world in order photography for a while. Even an eco-crusader needs to enjoy the healing powers of nature's remaining beauty. What do you feel about that?
I mean, it's definitely true. I mean, one aspect we discussed CITES before. There was a conference in Panama last year. It's the first time I think in 10 conferences at 30 years that I didn't attend a CITES COP, because I felt I've had it, I've tried. I said, people don't want to know, it's corrupt. There's thousands of people there spending millions of dollars talking theory and stuff which in practical terms means little. So the first time I decided to stay away from it. But from what you're saying, enjoying the best of what nature has to offer, as I said, I can see it every day. This is essentially an intact ecosystem I'm living in. I have photographed on my trail cameras down here up to 30 species, 30 mammals, not just species, but 30 mammals moving past it. So it's an intact system. I enjoy it. It exists. It's possible. It's still possible. I don't know how much longer, but as long as it's there, I get enjoyment out of it. I'm happy to drive down to Samburu into a national park among a herd of elephants, and just spend 2 or 3 hours in the middle of a group which stands in the shade in the middle of the day under a tree. I greatly enjoy it. So yes, that's a nice balance to have.
So it sounds as if that gives you the sort of the psychological immunization against the sort of witnessing the hardships, to feel that intactness, that connection, that peace.
But it's then also the contrast, knowing that side of it and then seeing the other side of it. I mean, seeing, as I said, elephants enjoying freedom, running around, especially now we have had rains, the grass is green, they're full of energy and spirit, and they're out there running around and having a good time and mating. And then, I'm about to fly back out to Asia to document, as I said, what's happening to elephants when they are performing in circuses and safari parks in China, to then see that side of it. So it makes it even more crass, more, hitting home to have this side, and then be able to see the other side, the exact opposite of what you hope it should be or what it should be. So yes, having both sides sometimes makes it more difficult. If you only see the beauty, or if you only see what the average Chinese sees in a safari park and has never seen the other side, he will never be able to have that comparison and that, way of being able to decide for him or herself, is there something wrong with all this?
Do you have, I mean, I know that do you sort of like talk with your wife? Do you have people that you can speak to sort of express how you feel about it, or is it something that you deal with yourself?
Mostly with myself. My wife has come to the conclusion that I'm going too deep into all this for her, taste, and that there has to be a limit how far she wants to push this. So in her, yes, we do encounter scenarios. I sometimes take her on trips. We go and look at things together, but overall, she doesn't want to expose herself to some of this. Of course, when I'm out with film crews who are looking for this kind of controversy or this kind of imagery to illustrate certain points, then these discussions do arise with people who have journalistic background, who know how to deal with topics like this, how to do their fact checking. Then we get into more detailed discussions on some of this. But yes, it's not easy to find parties which are interested to get into depth in this type of discussions.
Does it make you lonely?
Look, as I said, there's the internet now, there's books, no, I don't really feel lonely. I mean, I'm quite happy at home. As I said, my wife is pretty much every day in town. There's some shopping or this or that to do. I sometimes don't go into our little town for 3 weeks at a time because I don't really need it, you know. So yes, I mean, human company can be enjoyable, especially on the level where there's common understanding, but just human company for the sake of human company doesn't bring that much for me anymore.
Moving on to that sort of looking at the human psychology a little bit more, I was really struck in one piece that you'd written. There was the contrast between the rhinos and the bushmeat trade with chimpanzees, and we didn't cover that much of the bushmeat trade is monkeys, isn't it? Monkeys and also chimps, I think.
There's anything. All the primates, all the antelopes, right up to the elephants. I mean, I've lived in parts of Congo where I was served elephant meat every second day.
Well, you wrote in this piece, the fact is that when it comes to wildlife conservation, the animals are not the problem, the humans are. Dealing with the problem would logically mean dealing with humans. Yes, dealing with humans can be hard work and a real uphill struggle. And most wildlife conservation experts didn't go into this business to deal with the frustration that comes with human interaction. In my opinion, what we need is a new type of conservationist, one who's interested in humans and human nature. Maybe that means psychologists or even psychiatrists, or as I've argued in the past, real eco-missionaries willing to live with the people and work with them on a daily basis, even on a Sunday. So why is it that you feel that conservationists really needs those skills of psychological training or a psychiatric training to perform the work that needs to be done?
Because as I said, we have reached a stage where we are the problem. That is not the animal. Whatever is left out there should be left the way it is, but it is not because of the human population pressure, especially in parts like this one, like Africa, where I live. So, to deal with the human aspect of it, how can you build, make your boma where you keep your cattle more predator proof so you don't lose cattle, so you don't have to poison the hyenas and the lions and so on. That needs sitting down with humans, with village chiefs and so on, talking for hours, listening to arguments. For them, it's often entertainment. And most conservationists, that's not why they went into this. They want to be out in the bush, doing some scientific work, counting chimp nests, or doing some other, interesting research and collecting of data. They want to be out in the wilderness. That's what, for them, conservation is all about. But in my opinion, conservation is dealing with humans. I mean, I keep telling the story of when I moved to this project in the Congo. Originally, they had, this was one of the strongholds of elephants in the colonial time, with some 100,000 elephants living along the CER, the Congo border. When I got there, there were a few thousand left, and now there are probably a few hundred left, if at all. And I kept saying, we have to do something. Why do you keep butchering these elephants? I know you need the meat. I know you like the meat. You now can transport the meat to markets in Bangui, smoked and so on. I know the ivory all goes to Khartoum and you get decent money for it and so on. But, within 2 or 3 days, the village chiefs came to me and said, okay, you want us to stop hunting elephants? I said, yes, because it's unsustainable what you're doing. You're going to pay the price down the line sooner or later, if not you, your son. They said, okay, but if you want us to protect elephants, or if you want us to protect your elephants, they have become all my elephants overnight. We want a dispensary. We want a new airstrip. We want a new landing jetty for the port and so on. I said, come on, I'm not your government. But it became, these became my elephants. And if I wanted them to be protected, I had to pay. And then you start getting into everyday discussions. You do nothing else. I mean, missionaries do that. I've had good missionary friends in the Congo, and I admired them, American missionaries, for willing to do this all day long, every day. People would show up at their doorsteps with all their problems which need to be discussed, and they had the time and energy to do all this. And I admired them for it. And I said, if the conservationists have this time and energy and this willingness to interact with the people and explain them why nature and sustainability and wildlife and all that is important for them in the long run, for their children, maybe we would be better off. And that's basically what I tried to say in that piece. I wish we had the same mentality in the conservation community as I find with some of the missionaries.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it also struck me in terms of and you were mentioning the reaction of the children to the pig slaughter, and the difference. It can seem something of a luxury to have the concern for non-human animals that many of us in the West now have. It can seem to be sort of like, if someone needs the meat, then it's a different matter from going out on a trophy hunt and shooting a lion or something. That's a very difficult area, but the absence of any form of empathy or sense of connection does seem to be sort of psychologically interesting. And in one of the other pieces that was on your website, and was it Dale Peterson who wrote it, and was talking about traveling in Myanmar. And he says greed and lawlessness are common enough, but there's also that cold callousness, that strangely hard attitude I note among the animal marketers, those smiling-faced purveyors of tiger skins and bear bladders and deer penises, of live snakes and birds and monkeys and dogs, of reptiles and amphibians, that has sneaked up on and surprised me. Does that surprise you? Do you think there's something sort of missing when people don't have any care, or do you think that this is part of it's just economy?
No, I do feel strongly about there's something missing. I mean, have I got the right to say there's something missing? I didn't grow up in that environment. I didn't get that background. I didn't get that interaction with I did get all the interaction with our pets and so on, so that relationship might not have been there with the people I look at and condemn. I mean, I'm now thinking of an incident only about 3-4 years ago, just before COVID, where we watched in a town in Laos, somebody butchering a few geese, and the knife, and then cutting the throat and then sticking them upside down in a water bucket, and they lived and lived, and you could see they were still alive. They were not dead. They were bleeding out slowly, in suffocating, and you felt like saying, why didn't you cut off the whole head, or put an end to it? You must see the suffering now going on for minute after minute. What doesn't happen up here that you say, okay, let's at least make it quick and short and over with, which is something which I think should be fundamentally part of our nature in humanity. But it is not there in some of these societies, and that's probably what Dale was referring to when he saw it.
And yeah, I mean, he goes on about to describe a little pangolin in a cage, trembling and clinging onto a turtle in his or her fear, and this clearly frustrated the owner of the shop, who proceeded to poke through the cage bars with a broom handle, and Dale writes, as if she intended to kill the creature on the spot. And he said that he interacted. He was shouting at her, and then got involved. He couldn't hold off. And I wonder how hard it is to witness not just the pain of the animals, but that sort of the response of the humans, and whether those kind of psychological conservationists might be required on that level as well.
As I said, I wish there were psychologists out there studying this specific aspect of why certain, I mean, I believe pretty much anybody I know back home or in our societies would react similarly to the way I did to cruelty and suffering, while that is definitely not there in certain parts of Asia, in certain parts of Africa. I don't know if this has to do with just the survival aspects, that they are just much harder to all this because they can't afford to have this empathy and sympathies, because it's everyday survival is more important, while we never had to live with that. So I don't know if that's it, but I quite often, buy an animal and let it free again. I mean, if the situation arises, I mean, actually in places like Burma, they sell you birds in little cages, which you can specifically buy to free again. So there's a whole industry of going in and buy these things and let them fly again, which I do all the time. But also locals do it. It brings luck or something, so they know it's a good thing to do. But still it goes on every day that somebody captures them. Probably the same bird is caught again the next day and put it back in the basket again and resold again. So some of that, I have a problem with, but I don't know how to deal with it, how to analyze it, how to interpret it. I'm not close enough to these societies and that I fully understand. I'm not cross-cultural in that context, that I fully understand what makes them tick and motivate. So that's a frustrating component in some cases. But yeah, I quite often buy animals and let them go again if I feel they have a chance in nature, in the natural environment.
I had another question at the tip of my tongue just before you finished talking, which has now disappeared. Yeah, it has disappeared. But I wondered, I mean, also as well as these sort of like challenging sort of psychological issues, you face up to danger as well in the work that you do, to actual danger to yourself.
I think that's a lot of time exaggerated. I mean, I've done it for long enough now that I kind of know and sense when I push the envelope. And if I get into a scenario where I feel it's getting uncomfortable for them, therefore it's getting uncomfortable for me, I'm filming too much, I'm asking too many questions, or people start wondering what I'm really doing here and start watching me, then I get the hell out of town. So, I've learned to deal with that aspect to some extent. So I'm not very concerned about my personal safety. Wildlife trade, wildlife suffering is not a criminal activity, as drug dealing or arms dealing or human trafficking. So it's not taken that seriously in terms of law enforcement. Therefore, wherever you are, it's not that such a big issue. Therefore, if you're investigating it and trying to expose it and they realize that's what you might be doing, that doesn't mean you're risking your life as if you exposed drug trafficking, for example. So in that sense, that danger is often exaggerated, and I don't feel that's a major issue for me.
My question has returned, which was about we were talking about a sort of possible lack of empathy, but there's also the other psychological motivations for certainly for purchasing products from the endangered animals. Some of them being a perceived medicinal value, and others the status, the sort of status side of that, and those. I mean, those two reasons actually justify an awful lot of purchases of a lot of things, a lot of things that realistically we really shouldn't be needing to buy, whether it's the sort of like the latest of a particular brand of phone or a new car or whatever it is. The fact that these consumer decisions also impact endangered animals is to a certain extent not the point. The point is this kind of human irrationality of buying something to make us feel better, or when there's no sort of scientific evidence for a particular cure, just through belief or faith, and for the status side of it, that we almost don't care about the cost so long as it benefits our ego. And those aspects of human psychology are particularly destructive in the area that you work in, as well as more generally, it seems.
I mean, it is true even in the bushmeat context, bushmeat is a status product in the towns, meaning it costs more. I've done a specific study of comparing prices of gorilla meat versus cow meat, of a chimpanzee head cut off versus a pig's head cut off, and shown that the wildlife products are generally a lot more expensive by the time they reach urban centers. And at that stage, the people who are buying it know it's illegal what they're doing it, but it's part of their status culturally to offer wildlife products to your husband in the evening, or friends which come for dinner or whatever, is part of the status, and that's why you prefer to pay a higher price. There might be a taste component to it as well, but a lot of time it is status. You go to government banquets and you find bushmeat being served in big quantities. So on that front, it exists, for example, in Africa and Central Africa, not so much here in East Africa. But then you go to Southeast Asia, and it's even more pronounced in terms of the end products being, as I said, all the tiger bone jewelry. With rhino horn, the world still believes it's all about medicinal. It's not. It's now all about status as well. I mean, this, the tiger bone, the rhino horn powder is being sniffed like cocaine at parties and so on. But the end product is mostly jewelry again for sale. A Libetian cup or an arm bangle of rhino horn per gram is probably 50 times more expensive than the shavings which fall on the floor, which are used for the medicinal component. So the jewelry product is 50 times more valuable per gram than the byproduct, which is the medicinal stuff which falls on the floor. And, then they're even talking there in that context about the reverse stigma syndrome, meaning you reach a stage in status where you want to illustrate that you're above the law, you want to have illegal products, you want to have a rhino horn sitting on your desk when your visitors walk in, to illustrate that you're above the law, that you're very wealthy, that you have it all, that you don't bother about enforcement activities, and that's part of the status. And, that is very worrisome as far as I'm concerned, because you see it in China and in Southeast Asia. Vietnam is not very different. You see it everywhere.
And so what do you feel that, what is your hope now for how your work can change the way that we, all of us, think, feel, act, and respond towards the problems that you're documenting?
Okay, I mean, as I said, when it comes to animal welfare, we talked about it before, this empathy and so on. I don't know if I'm ever going to change anything in societies in Southeast Asia or in Africa or whatever, for reasons we discussed. So I don't have that much hope. In terms of the wildlife trade in general, I thought the new window had opened with this, with the recent epidemic, COVID, whereby we can link it closely to potential wildlife trade, or cross-species transmission, zoonosis scenario like previous such pandemics. So, the world has to start paying attention to that. So if we ship tons of pangolins, scales, or even live pangolins from Africa to Asia, there's something, there's a risk with all that. When we capture the things here, But then the other day I was in a market in Luang Prabang in Laos, and they were selling, freshly caught, still alive, but some dead horseshoe bats. Now the horseshoe bats are on the front line of this cross-species transmission business, and everybody knows that COVID might have started with bats, which went from the caves in the Yunnan province to the Wuhan lab and so on. And they're only a few hundred kilometers away. You can buy them in the market for dinner. And you say to yourself, okay, if it hasn't sunk in here, will it ever sink in anywhere? If that message hasn't come across, if the authorities haven't said, okay, for the time being, no more bushmeat in the markets, certainly no more bats or whatever. If that's not happening, then where is the hopes? But as I said, to me, it's still, I know that the American government has allocated big chunks of new money for the US Fish and Wildlife to try to understand the international trade in bushmeat, because it's a national security issue now. COVID has illustrated that it can become very quickly a national security issue, that we need to elevate it to on that level. And as such, there's certainly big money, there's certainly more players, there's certainly more departments involved in it. So maybe there's some hope there. That's the only thing I can hope for.
And yet you still carry on.
Yeah, as I said, the elephant film, and then I don't know, maybe I do giraffes next. They also have a rotten deal.
Do they? I didn't know giraffes had a rotten deal.
No, it's now, the exports are huge. I mean, I was the other day it's called Safari World outside Bangkok. They now have 220 giraffes, which is more than you will ever see on any safari in any national park. And they're all in this relatively small outdoor area, of course, but it's all about these feeding platforms. Every zoo, safari park has now a huge feeding platform, and all these people have to buy their carrots to feed these giraffes. And everybody has his picture taken with, there's your head, there's the giraffe head, there's your carrot, the giraffe tongue comes out and grabs your carrot, and that's the great selfie picture which goes on every Instagram accounts. And there are hundreds, thousands of people lining up for these images, and every zoo, every safari park knows it, and that it's big money. And therefore giraffes get exported now by the hundreds from South Africa mostly, for these, these shows. I mean, it's only for this selfish stuff, which it's, and, that's not their natural life. I didn't see a young baby. I didn't see a youngster. So there's no breeding going on. So it's not a natural life cycles in this safari park. It's poor show, and it's all about money. And there's something wrong with that. And again, the world doesn't know anything about it.
No, there's something wrong with us, that we can overlook the anything. Well, I suppose people just don't know about giraffes, so why would they know that that's not natural for a giraffe? It's like a whole re-education program required for the world to change anything. Is there anything that you feel that we haven't covered which we'd really like to address?
No, I have said a lot of where I stand, how I feel, that, I'm not too hopeful about where it's all going. The one aspect here in Africa, it's very pronounced, is, Kenya has now over 40 million people. When I came, it had about 12 million. So, it's a huge increase in my lifetime. It shows up wherever you go. This little town I'm living in, there's a lot more people. There's a lot more people living off the land as well. There's a lot of urbanization going on as well. But yes, this human population pressure is unsustainable as far as nature and wildlife is concerned. We are supposed, according to UN, having 160 million people by the end of this century, from 40 million now, 45 million. And I don't see any hope. not for the forest out here, not for the wildlife, not with 160 million people. So when are we going to address that component? Either they're all going to stand at the Mediterranean, jumping on boats to come to Britain and everywhere else, or this is not going to be sufficient out here for all these humans wanting to live a good life and ever better life. People want cars. Now they all have motorbikes here already. Before it was bicycles. When I came here, people walked, then it was bicycles, now it's motorbikes, and then it's cars. And we can't live, 50 million people in this country with that kind of consumption level. And certainly, certainly nature can't, deal with us having that level of consumption. So once nature goes, we go.
I remember when I first came across you, it was in the book Poached, and your words to the writer were, I'll only talk to you if you don't try and sugar me up and make me sound as if I've got a happy ending to my story or something like that. And we've certainly ended on that tone of not a happy ending.
Yeah, so you were forewarned. So
I was, well, I have the same I have the same depressing outlook. But thank you so much for your time today. Thank you very much for being a guest on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thanks for having me.